the biggest piece is the conversations that we're having about place. Whether those are the conversations between a developer and the policies that they need to have happen, none of these conversations are working. And we are living in a time of polycrisis. I see place as very much sort of at the nexus of that. If we could solve place, we would be able to solve all of those things.
Hello, and welcome to Talking Place, the podcast where we bring placemakers and storytellers together to talk about place. I'm your host, Tanisha Raffiuddin, and in this episode, I am thrilled to welcome Devorah Block. Devorah is an educator, advisor, and program developer with experience across 3 continents and multiple cultures. Devorah has worked with organizations as diverse as the Fondazione Palazzo Strozzi, the Pinacoteca di Brera, the Ferrari Museums, the Historical Archives of the European Union, and the Built Environment Trust in London. In 2023, Devorah launched the Place Literacy Project to tackle the persistent challenges of communication across boundaries through the development of language and literacy tools that empower individuals and communities to understand, articulate, and reshape the places they inhabit. In this episode, we break down what the concept of place literacy is all about and how we can create a shared language with agreed definitions and terms to facilitate better understanding and communication between various built environment practitioners and the communities they serve. We go as far as working out how to solve the world's polycrises, so you don't want to miss out on this one. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Devorah, welcome to Talking Place, the podcast where we bring placemakers and storytellers together to talk about place.
Thank you so much for having me. This is such a pleasure.
Likewise. So for context, Devorah and I met through one of our mutual enigmatic friends, Marsha Ramroop. And we clicked, and she's working on an amazing little project called the Place Literacy Project. So I absolutely had to bring her on board to talk about place and place literacy, which I'm sure she's going to dive into as we dig deeper into the podcast. But let's start off with getting to know Devorah a little better. So tell our listeners about you. What's been your journey so far?
I actually come from outside of the built environment. So my background is in art history, is what I studied through school, and then mostly informal education, a lot of work in museums, and generally with a diversity of publics, connecting them with sort of complex ideas. So yeah, I guess that's my background. And I've brought that perspective into everything that I've done in the last 20 years.
Amazing. So obviously you said you're coming from outside of the built environment. Tell us how you found your way into the built environment.
Excellent question. I actually came in as a strategy consultant. So my very first sort of interaction with the built environment sector was working with an organization called the Built Environment Trust, which most people probably know through the Building Center. And so amazing organization, really complex with an incredible history. I came in to work with the CEO and the board of trustees as they were coming up for their 90th anniversary. And so we were looking a lot at what their strategy would be for, the next 90 years and what they wanted to be doing. As I said, I came in as a strategic consultant, and I was trying to help them define their mission and figure out what that would look like when it sort of was translated into programming and activities and all of that sort of thing. But of course, the subject was the built environment, and it was an amazing place, I think, to have an introduction because it's an organization that aims to serve across the entire sector as opposed to just one element. And I suddenly found myself sort of immersed in this world that felt very familiar because I live in the built environment, and yet completely foreign. And I started to realize how very little I understand about the way our built environment is shaped.
Wow, I actually love that you felt it was familiar yet foreign at the same time. What I love about working in the built environment is exactly as you said, it impacts us all. You know, housing and shelter is one of our basic human needs. And
Yes.
so through the work that we do, we have the potential to hopefully positively impact a lot of people. And that brings me to my next question, is the question I ask everybody on the podcast, because everyone has a different take on it. How would you define the word place?
So I feel a little bit that's a trick question. I mean, I think it'll become clear why as we keep talking, but I think that there's an easy answer, which is that, and it's not my own, it's one that comes out of geography, that place is space plus meaning. And so that's, it's an easy thing to grab onto, and I think that it's a really strong statement. Geography makes this distinction between location, space, and place. So location is, it's an address. It's the what three words, right? It's just a physical pinpoint. A space is a volume, an area that has potential. Something can be made out of it. It becomes place when meaning forms there. And so I think that also recognizes a fundamental human perspective to place. But at the same time, going back to the trick question thing, I think the ways in which we define that meaning, I think that probably goes to the heart of the Place Literacy Project, is trying to understand what are those factors, what are those elements that are impacting the meaning that we find in place, and how are those different for you and for me, and what does that mean as well?
That was so beautiful. Space plus meaning, so simple yet so effective. I think anyone would get that, and obviously space as a volume, and a lot of our built environment practitioners use that volume to create let's say, I'm going to romanticize this now, some of the magical places we live in, and where our shared memories are stored as humans, as a society, and something we pass on from generation to generation through our places.
I love that you went straight to that sort of the generation to generation and the storage of memory, because I do think that one of those really key and potentially overlooked elements of the meaning of a space, of a place, is that temporal and historical and not necessarily immediately visible aspect, but which is nevertheless so present. And I think that because it's not always visible, and it's certainly not always visible to everyone, it can be overlooked. And I think that's a lot of where we go wrong, actually, when we try to create a place that doesn't work. I think it's often because we're not paying attention to some of those less visible elements.
That's exactly what I want to dig deep into. Where we go wrong, why we go wrong, and how can we avoid going wrong in the future. I think that's probably very valuable for our listeners who are practicing in the built environment. Go on to my next question, which I ask everybody as well. This should be an easy one. This isn't a trick question. Well, I hope not anyway. What's your favorite place in the whole wide world?
I'm going to go with a beach that is on the Mediterranean coast of Italy, of Tuscany, called Puntala. And it's right across from Elba, near a town called Castiglione alla Pescaia, I think. I'm now forgetting. And it is beautiful. And I have the incredible privilege of getting to spend a lot of time there in the off season. So when it is empty, and I think certainly over the last sort of 10 years or so, it has probably become my happy place, as they say.
Oh, I love that. Your happy place. And I think for the listeners out there who don't know, you are actually dialing in from Florence.
I am. So I split my work time I split between London and Florence, but my personal life is very much based in Italy.
Oh, you love that. I think a lot of people who visit Italy, even once, fall in love with it instantly. I mean, certainly for me, my first time to Italy was visiting Rome, and as an architect, that was almost torturous, because I had a long list. I had 5 days and a list of maybe 100 sites. and it was next to impossible. I don't even think I got to half of that list that it's in my diary, my little sketch. It's one of those things like, and I told myself after that first visit, I have to come back to Italy every year. There's just too much here, concentrated in this little boot-shaped peninsula, and this, this corner of the world that's going, hundreds, thousands of years back, and the birthplace of a lot of architectural history. And you're absolutely right. I have to go back and certainly for
and come to Florence.
Definitely, yeah. I have been to Florence. I loved it. Again, took my breath away, but it was smaller, so more manageable.
Exactly. It is. I mean, I think obviously Italy is sort of a mecca for any architect. I find it so interesting now as I'm sort of my own understanding of architecture, of the built environment, of urban planning and urbanism is starting to sort of slowly grow and become more refined and maybe sensitive. The ways in which Italian cities sort of there's this intersection of so many of the issues that are really pressing right now, I think, across the built environment, and how do we move forward, or how do you, I guess, move forward as a sort of broad professional sector? I think I'm not sure if I would say answers in countries like Italy that have such a long sort of architectural built history that's still extant. So I wouldn't say answers necessarily, but I would say sort of provocations that can point to new answers moving forward. I think it's a really interesting space to dig down into.
Absolutely. Anyway. Now, speaking of provocations, now let's get into the meat of your work. Tell us about the place literacy project, especially for those who don't know. Give us the rundown.
So I am notoriously bad at saying this in just a few words, but I will do my best. I think that it goes back to what I was saying before, that experience of interacting in the built environment space and realizing how little I understood about what was going on behind the scenes, I suppose. And so place literacy started to grow up as a way for me to think about and talk about developing our sort of baseline ability, just like we speak about a textual literacy. So it's knowing our ABCs, right? Everybody should be literate, and it does give you incredible power. Being literate in our places, being able to sort of understand and engage with the places we live in a critical way and an informed way is essentially what it's about. And looking at that as, in a lot of ways, that literacy piece, I've landed on it, I think, intentionally, because I do think it really is something it is everything from sort of the basics, and that analog with textual literacy works. It's everything from knowing your ABCs to knowing your sentence structures to building your vocabulary, and you can just read the basics, or you can become a poet or a novelist. And being literate does not mean that you are an expert or that you've devoted your life to it. It means just that you're able to engage with the material and to do it thoughtfully and on your own terms, to bring that material into your own world. So I guess I'm not sure how brief or clear, but that's what the place literacy is sort of about.
Amazing. And so what inspired you to set this up? And what are the main goals or objectives you are hoping to achieve by sharing this with the world?
I think that what inspired me was probably frustration, for better or for worse. I think that what I see is that there are a couple of things that are not working, and I feel like for no good reason. So I'm very frustrated by that. A big piece is the conversations. The biggest piece, I guess, sort of in general, is the conversations that we're having about place. Whether those are the conversations between a developer and the local residents, whether they are the conversations between communities and their local government, or between the people who are running the businesses and the policies that they need to have happen. None of these conversations are working. And we are living in a time of polycrisis. I think I see place as very much sort of at the nexus of that. speaking somewhat absurdly, if we could solve place, we would be able to solve all of those things, right? Which is not the goal.
But I mean, just for us listening, you talk about the polycrisis. Let's spell them out. What are the polycrises you're referring to?
We're looking at everything. I mean, there's obviously a massive climate crisis that we're confronting. There is an equity crisis, migration crises, have economic, just every single thing from, and we're looking as well at a period globally of mass disruption on just about every scale, right? We can't just fix one thing. I think it's forcing us to confront and admit that we cannot look at things in isolation. We have to look at things systemically. And so, and that also brings that the one thing that I saw was these conversations that aren't working. And obviously at the root of that is language. One of the things that frustrated me was that it seems as though there is so much incredible work being done in what I would call place literacy, right? And this, so like so much work that we are doing about raising people's awareness, connection, engagement, and franchising people. But it all seems to be happening without speaking to each other, right? We're not connecting those for that greater good that we would be able to create out of it. And again, I think that comes down to a lack of language, a shared language that can bring us together. The siloing, I mean, I think that anybody who works, your listeners in this sector, I cannot think of a single professional I have spoken to over the last 4 or 5 years since I've been involved in this that has not at some point in our conversation spoken about the siloing, the vertical siloing, and how frustrated they are. Nobody wants it. But it seems to be this unbreakable barrier, which I think that there is a communication piece and a language piece that they will not solve it, absolutely, but that can help to solve that, help to raise the voices and the profiles of all of the people who are already working in this. I don't think that I have anything new to offer, except hopefully maybe a tool that just brings the conversations into the same space, and through that multiplies the potential of what we're able to do.
Yeah, I want to unpack that a little bit. Yeah, I totally agree with you about the silos across the various sectors, because there's so many cross disciplines involved in the built environment. The built environment is not a one skill set. You can't deliver. It's not just engineers. It's not just architects. It's the contractors. It's the bricklayers. It's the people who invest the money. And everybody speaks a different language because they all come from different sectors, different backgrounds. And we're all now trying to be more empathetic towards each other, to the various professions. And we're trying to be more inclusive, as, you know, not to our dear friend Marsha.
Exactly.
So tell me, you mentioned this place literacy is a tool that the built environment practitioners can engage with. How would they go about using this tool in their work?
So in complete honesty, it is a work in progress. I've just come off last week, I've been participating in a project that's run by the constructivist out of Bristol. Amazing. Oliver Broadbent, if anybody doesn't know him, certainly if you're an engineer, you should look up his book. I think I have it right here. The Regenerative Structural Engineer. Shout out to Ollie. Together with Chatham House. Things. If only I had my own book to shout out. I've been going on this amazing process with the Regenerative Design Lab. And what that has been very much focused on has been looking at what is this tool? What is the tool that is useful that can really unlock this? And I think that's an open question for me right now. I'm looking at, a framework and a lexicon, I think, that can bring our individual languages together, because I think jargon gets a bad name at times incorrectly. So jargon develops for a really important reason, and it develops within any sector and any profession to facilitate conversations, because those words end up meaning a very specific thing. The problem is that they are only specific to that community of practice. And so having a tool, essentially, honestly, I'm imagining a picture that sort of says, these are the elements of place. That's where it starts. And that allows you with your language and me with my language, whether my language is actually my language as a community member, essentially, or as an art historian, I guess, and your language as an architect or as an engineer or as a planner or as a policymaker, oh, look, we're all talking about this area here. We're all talking about, people in place. We're all talking about time and its effect. We're talking about it in different ways or with different language, but we can locate ourselves in the same place and then start to figure out where those overlaps are.
Absolutely. And my research tells me that your project aims to foster collaboration across these diverse groups. And I know you've just said that it's currently in work in progress, but are there any best practices examples out there to share where this has worked well and, place literacy or a shared language has helped in the creation of inclusive and resilient places? I'm sure our audience would love to hear this.
The first one that comes to mind is probably Civic Square in Birmingham, which I think a lot of your listeners, if you guys are not already familiar, definitely make yourselves familiar with the work that they're doing there. They, of course, wouldn't call it place literacy, but I would say that fundamentally a key piece of the project that they're doing there, where they are working really hand in hand across everyone from the residents to the organizers, the policymakers, the builders, the designers, every single person sitting around that table with equitably. So sitting around that table with agency, and the conversations that they are having and the ways that they, I think their own language that is developing through that, it'll be yet another small pocket, and that is fine. But what they've done is they've created a space in which real, true agency, I think democratic agency exists.
I love that, democratic agency. And we certainly talk a lot about community engagement, stakeholder engagement on this podcast and in the work that we do at Concept Creators when we're designing and creating brands and identities for these places. So at the heart of it, it's the people, it's the residents, it's the stakeholders who is directly impacted by the place, and it's not always about the triple bottom line.
I think that's exactly right, and in a lot of ways, I think I see place literacy and the tools that we will eventually come up with very much as something that is going to facilitate conversations across the board. So that really is everything from policy to practitioners to the public. My personal interest or sort of expertise obviously is in the general public, right? It's how do I make the basic underpinnings of what an urban planner is doing and the decisions that they have to tackle, how do I make that accessible to a kindergartner, a 5-year-old? Not all of it, but what is that entry point that they can start to understand the complexity of the places that we live in? And also, how do I make that urban planner a little bit more aware of the complexity beyond the sort of structural material complexity, but those temporal elements that we spoke about at the beginning, and all of those pieces together.
I think that's such a good way to explain it, particularly the kindergartner and children who are very much part of the built environment. They are the future. Essentially, a lot of what we're doing is for them and for their benefit. And obviously, they will then pass it on to the next generation. We already talked about generations and memories. And at the time you mentioned that's where things go wrong is when we don't use that shared language. Do you want to drill down into that a little bit more? Like, why do things go wrong? And perhaps what good looks like? What can good look like if one were to use the place literacy tools and framework?
So I think that I have to start with the caveat that obviously I'm not a designer. I'm not trained in this field at all. And so I can only speak sort of from my own perspective and perception. But my really strong feeling, at least at the moment, is that in the vast majority of cases, things go wrong when we take too partial a perspective in making our decisions. That goes for anything, not just around the built environment. When we're only looking at one aspect of any decision that we need to make in our lives, if we focus too much on one aspect, we lose sight of the others, and there are those unintentional consequences that come out of it. In the case of the built environment, I think we're still struggling to really engage with place in the complexity that it demands. And when I started this project, I actually used to speak about built environment literacy. And my argument in part was that from the 60s onwards, we have had this voyage around environmental literacy, around the natural environment, where we have increasingly understood the complexity of our natural ecosystems. We've started to map those and understand what the different pieces are and how they interact with each other. And we've been teaching that to kids since it entered the curriculum, I think, in the UK in 1987. So not that long ago, actually. Arguably much too late, and arguably we still have a long ways to go in terms of our literacy. But at the same time, I think that there is a direct line that goes from our building awareness to starting to build a societal literacy through education, to all of the grassroots movements that we have seen in the last 25 years popping up with increasing frequency. Have we solved it? Clearly not. But do we have a massively improved understanding of the complexity? Yes. And initially what I was saying is we need that on the built. We do not have a definition of the built environment. We do not have an understanding of what the system is, what the pieces are and how they're affecting each other. That actually doesn't exist. There is no generally accepted definition of the built environment. You can ask some people and they will say buildings and the spaces between them. You can ask other people and they will say any human intervention in our natural world. It's too big a gap. We don't have enough common terms for that. I moved to, as opposed to environmental literacy, and now I've gone off on I feel like I'm preaching now, I'm sorry. Stop me if you need to.
No, go for it. This is gold. This is what we're all about, provocation.
I moved to place because the constant reply that I got was, okay, but what about the natural environment? And I was like, yes, but we have an understanding of the natural environment, and we haven't done that same work of really looking critically and carefully at the systems of the built environment. And if we're going to deal with, there needs to be that balance. If we're going to put them together, right? How do we talk about them? And then I basically decided that we missed the boat on built environment literacy. we need to jump that, and we need to start looking at place. And place is a holistic paradigm that takes all of those sort of considerations together and refuses to allow them to be singled out, right? It recognizes that I can't intervene in the built environment without affecting the natural environment, and vice versa, right? Mm-hmm. And so what we need is to understand, what is the system of place? Mm-hmm. And you know, I think that there's a real academic piece here as well that I would love to, go back and do a PhD and sort of explore. But I think that there's an academic piece as well around, if we're looking at this as a system, what are its boundaries? What is the scale? I am quite convinced that there is a way for us to understand and define the basics of place that takes us around the world, right? That is not, the answers are culturally specific, but the questions are not. And that also has quite a large scope for scale. I can ask the same questions to understand my bathroom as I can to understand a school or a public square or a neighborhood. And it's sort of drilling down into what those questions are that can really reveal the sort of the invisible, the partially visible alongside the visible of a place, and how it sort of is shaping our experiences that I'm really interested in. And I absolutely got on a soapbox. Yeah.
No, go for it. Absolutely. And I hope you do find time in the future to go back and to go ahead and do this PhD that you talk about. I feel like it could be a much needed resource. Who knows what that future looks like? We're all trying to do our best in future gazing and what the world looks like. We're in 2025, 25 years into the 21st century. Oh my God.
And when did that happen?
When did that happen? When I graduated, how many ever years ago, fresh off of doing a master's in sustainable architecture, we were talking about meeting 2030, our climate targets. 2030 is 5 years. It's in 5 years, and we're still having the same conversations that I did as a fresh graduate, that conversation hasn't moved.
which is very concerning on very, very many levels, obviously. I think, going back to the PhD, well, or not, I'm, for now, what I'm really interested in is actually sort of exploring the same question, but through conversations with people. So we've been developing place awareness workshops, which are really about delving into that, but with as wide a range of people as we can. So whether those are school children, aspiring architects and engineers of the future, professionals who are already working in the sector, developers, communities, right across the board, really digging into sort of sitting in a place and in any place, wherever we might be sitting, but really taking the time to think about what has created that place and how it's come to be in the way that it is and what that can teach us about the way places are shaped.
Yeah, that's very much at the root of what we do at Concept Culture in terms of developing place identities and place narratives. If you're welcome to share a little bit more about the place awareness workshops, like where can someone sign up or what can they expect if they sign up for your place awareness workshop?
They can find the Place Literacy Project online at Place Literacy. It's a very pared down website at the moment. There's a sign up form if people are interested just in being involved, or people can drop a line through that to say that they're interested in the workshops. The Places workshops, we do two things. They are either, we have an off the shelf version, which goes into schools, communities, which people can essentially just ask us to come in and we sit down with the group. It's an interactive, observation-based, participative workshop that lasts for 90 minutes to 2 hours and can be tailored to just about any age group. I would focus on kids 10 and up for now, but if anybody wants to do it for somebody younger, I'm very happy to tailor it. And we spend 90 minutes as a group really looking intensely at where we are and co-creating an understanding of place together and marking that down and sharing it with each other and hopefully developing some takeaway tools that we can use then in our lives to apply in other places. That's the off-the-shelf version. And then we also are open to any tailoring around that. The first step is awareness. And then we can dig down into understanding and really starting to look at those dimensions. We've looked at doing stuff for maybe developers or a community who are really interested in a specific place and trying to, very similar to what you do, looking at what is our existing identity, though, is what we're really interested in exploring, the existing to give people tools to then predict the future that they want and make that happen, or that they think might be happening and how to avoid that, whatever that might be. But it's really for us about awareness, critical thinking, and sort of passing on that agency for people to make their own decisions. I obviously have my own ideas about what a good place is, and I'm really loath to believe that my idea in 2025 of what a good place is some sort of a universal truth. And so I'm much more interested in sort of taking a step back from that and understanding what makes any place what it is, good or bad, because I think that just gives us more power and more resilience. Send me an email. That's the short answer.
I think, if this is of interest, I think definitely go on the Place Literacy website, get in touch with Deborah, see how you can collaborate to create this shared language. But there was a very beautiful final thought that you talked about, place, all our understandings, that we all have a definition of that place. So in the start of the conversation, I asked, what's your definition of place? Good or bad? And one person's good place may be some person's nightmare. It's also subjective. There is no absolute good or absolute bad. It just depends on where you are in your life and various, sometimes age, it's where you are in your life and age. I mean, I'm just coming off of a visit to Disney World in Orlando, Florida,
which sounds like my hell.
Yeah, well, there we go. I mean, I loved it. It brought me, I watched some shows. Every time they sang Let It Go, it brought me to tears. So that was a magical connection. Me and an older millennial. But on the other hand, I was with my husband who didn't have the same magical experience that I did. But that's what it made me, in these everyday experiences, you realize, and like you've just said for yourself, like the crowds didn't bother me. All the 30, 40,000 other people who were there in that same space did not bother me. But for that, how many ever hours I spent, walked 30,000 steps. That's like the most my pedometer has tracked. But for me, it was the most magical place on earth. Because of the memories I have watching Disney growing up. Even recently, for right now, Frozen is my hot favorite. But just talking about this, what is universally good? I love when you talk about like everyone's truth is different.
And I think that you said something really powerful as well. It was a little bit throwaway, but that, and different times. So even, what's good for me now is not necessarily what was good for me 20 years ago or will be 20 years from now. And I think that there are these amazing, there's a few, Quality of Life Foundation is one. Scotland has a place standard, which is incredible. These sort of frameworks for creating good places. And I think that they are, I agree with them thoroughly, like on a personal level. And I think that they're powerful tools. I'm interested in the piece that goes behind that, I guess, and not sort of predefining. And when you said that, Marsha Ramroop, once again, if only I had her book next to me, she actually came to Florence and gave a talk that was about inclusion in the built environment. So it was just before the book came out. Building Inclusion, by the way, if anybody needs to pick up their copy still, much recommended as well. And there was this amazing moment during the conversation for me, which has stuck with me so strongly, in which one person who was participating sort of raised their hand and talked about the piazza in Italy as this incredible space where everyone is welcome, right? Where so much life happens and there are no barriers to entrance. And it's just this incredible space. And somebody else raised their hand and said, for the record, and I'm not sure how important this is, but the first woman who sort of said amazing place was not an Italian. An Italian man raised his hand and said, it's amazing to hear you say that. And I think that's a lot of people's perception. The piazza is probably the place where I feel least welcome and least safe as a non-binary gay man. I do, walking across, if I have to go through a piazza, I'm more happy around the edges of it because I know that the societal norms, there's nothing visible again, but I know that I am not welcome in that space, or at least I can't count on being welcome. And yes, it is heartbreaking. It is heartbreaking, but I think it goes really deeply to sort of pulls us up on the assumptions that we make about what is good and how other people experience things. And I think that goes, I don't think that that's only a question about inclusion. I think when we talk about ugly buildings, there's a lot of really ugly buildings out there that are very important to people. There are a lot of places that by one person's set of standards feel like non-places or feel insignificant that hold entire lives. And sometimes also not human lives. And I think that that's another piece that we don't think about often enough is the different types of life. But yes, we really have to remember our own positionality in all of these things, I think, really deeply.
Yeah, particularly in multicultural societies like the UK. I don't want to comment on Italy. I haven't spent enough time there to have an opinion about how multicultural the society is there. But definitely here in London, where I live, I've been here for a while, it's very important to be empathetic and aware of the various cultures that call London home. It's a global metropolis. The other city that comes close, obviously everyone knows New York, but the other one is Toronto. Toronto, I find, walking in the streets, I've been there a couple of times because my younger sister lives there. You'll find people of all color, shapes, and sizes there, and all living homogeneously. And I think, if I'm not wrong, the immigrant population is more than, let's say white Canadians. I mean, even immigrants are probably all naturalized Canadians at this point. And they do a really good job, well, at least on the face of it, as a tourist, as a visitor. I find that I can have any cuisine I want, I can think of, more so sometimes than this is going to cause a bit of controversy than London. Every time I mention this, I get a lot of hate, but it's just my truth. I feel like some of the food that I tasted in in Toronto, this was better than what I've had in London. But anyway, that's now we've gone a little off piece. But I think as you were talking,
food is a really
food is
important part of
important.
place.
But as you were talking about the example, this person in that conversation, and like you said, it's what you've done is stems out of frustration, and you want to do something about it.
Yeah.
Like you want to shake people's around and say, guys, come on, let's look at this differently. And I hope that more people engage with this project and fruitful collaborations come of that, and more meaningful places can be created on the back of that. That's my hope, because I feel like a lot of our conversation so far has been a bit doom and gloom. So I do want to bring some positivity and optimism into the chat as well.
And I also think that the frustration is, it's not because nothing's happening, it's because so much amazing stuff is happening. Like to bring that, and maybe I do sound really negative, I'm actually so optimistic and positive genuinely about all of these pockets of incredible activity that are happening across the world, across every sector. But when you look at the built environment sector and the work that is going into transforming it, the professionals are doing themselves. And I think that this is, somebody said to me yesterday, who, interestingly, he's looking at data and the way that data is shared and understood across the built environment. Dan Hughes, Alpha Insight, another plug. And he's put together this foundation called the Red Foundation, which is looking specifically at that. So it's data, which is a sort of area or space that I really know nothing about. But looking at that, and he mentioned as well that part of the siloing and part of the struggle that we have is that so many of the actors in the built environment sector are SMEs. So it's not like, and this was the example that he used, but which totally brought it home to me. He's like, it's not like with pharmaceuticals where you can name the top three, bring them into a room, globally top three, bring them into a room, and if you can get them to agree on something, then you've actually solved it, right? It's across the board. There are thousands and thousands of small actors. And in this case, that means that there are, at the very least, hundreds and hundreds of incredible examples of amazing work that is being done in one direction or another, but they don't have the time or the places or the language, I would argue, to speak to each other and to join it up. I actually think that we're at a very exciting time in the built environment and the things that are happening, and very, very positive. Not negative at all, genuinely, but we need to find those ways to be able to talk more with each other and to build on the conversations that we have in an easier way, because it's not that the will is missing, it's the ways.
Yeah. Speaking of ways, I believe in the power of storytelling, and obviously you're a big fan of literacy, language, and this shared language. In your view, what are the key factors that we should consider as practitioners when we're telling the story about a place and its people? A place and its people.
Oh, wow. That's an amazing question. I think I sort of immediately am coming at it from two different directions in my brain. One is about how to tell the story, and the other is how to learn the story, maybe from the practitioner's point of view. And I think that I actually feel like my answer about the telling is, well, maybe my answer about both of them is sort of the same. It feels a little bit banal, but I think it's true. I think it's the human element, right? It's about understanding what a place, I guess we go back to the beginning. If a place is space plus meaning, and meaning, at least as we understand it, is fundamentally human, then the story of a place is necessarily rooted in its people, and the way to tell its story is through those human elements. And likewise, I think one of the things that I have never sat comfortably with the term placemaking. I fear, and I think that this is in large part because of the ways in which also it has been, whatever the greenwashing equivalent of placemaking is, right? So it's been corrupted, I think, by a lot of practice where it's just sort of, it becomes a tick box, or if we put plants in, then it's a place, or if there's a cafe, we made a place. So I think there's a lot of shoddy practice that happens, not necessarily by placemakers, but probably by larger organizations that are trying to jump on a bandwagon. Having said that, I think, and I've had some interesting conversations with people about this who do not agree with me, which is most people. So I accept that. I fear that embedded in the words, if you do not know anything about the history of the practice of placemaking, embedded in the words, to me, as somebody who doesn't or didn't know any of that history, it sort of smacks of there's nothing here and I am going to create something. And which is not what good placemaking is. That's not what good placemaking practice is at all. And I know and recognize that. But I do think that I'm not alone as a member of the public in finding it to be a problematic term, because it sounds as though people are going to come, like where I live and what I live doesn't have any meaning because you're going to come in and make it into a place. This isn't already a place. But most importantly, I think that when we're coming into any place, whether we're coming in for a temporary sort of intervention or something more long term, it's that listening piece, right? It's trying to understand, and this is, again, and this is what anybody who is working well in this sphere does, right? This is what you guys do. You listen, and so it's not something Absolutely. That there are people who are doing it and doing it brilliantly. But the way that you learn a story of a place is by listening, and it's listening to the people who already live there. And I would argue, possibly hot on the heels of this regenerative design lab, but that another big piece that we've been missing up until now is our ability to listen to all forms of life and to recognize that other forms of life have meanings as well. And I'm not really sure how that sort of translates and what to do with it, but I'm quite convinced of it. That there's geological meaning to a place. There is, there are plant life. There is other sentient life out there that we underestimate. And again, it goes back to that beginning of, if we look with too much partiality, we're just bound to make mistakes. And so trying to be as holistic in our outlook as we can, I think, moves us forward. But so, yeah, I guess it's the human element. It's really listening and then maybe reflecting that human element.
Absolutely. Learning by listening, reflecting, and being holistic in our outlook. But the thing that struck me is about listening to other forms of life as well. And I think I just come off of a conversation from one of the place identities that we're doing, and we're weaving in nature into, it's a story of what was there before this particular place a manufacturing plant was, and there was rice paddy fields before the humans came and built a manufacturing facility. So we're now looking at how we're going to weave those textures, and how rice paddy fields, they grow in certain ways, and the farmers create routes so they can walk through them. And we're trying to bring that in. So just as you were mentioning, it's just come into me. I think we're following what you're.
Well, this is interesting. That's exactly what I wanted to say. I was like, oh my God, yet another such amazing, at the forefront, forward-looking work being done. And obviously, everyone who's listening to this podcast knows about the amazing work that you're doing, but not as many people as should do. There's too much amazing stuff that's happening that's still not known enough. And most importantly, not known enough by our colleagues, I think, as part of it, right? Because then we can share and we can build on each other and we do, it sounds very Disney World, but we make the world a better place.
Yeah. That's what I just came away from Disney. I think Walt Disney, master storyteller. I mean,
oh my gosh,
way ahead of his time.
Oh my gosh,
his legacy, 100 years on, and we're still watching those movies. There's so much to learn from that legacy in terms of storytelling. Agreed. And bringing everybody on this journey. Like 100 years later, if a resort can still have 40,000 people coming in. Like, I mean, I think other resorts would kill for that kind of absolutely. Engagement without even trying. They're getting that level of engagement, that level of footfall from people all over the world. Anyway, I think there are two things that come up in this conversation, and I think, and obviously strongly because you're all about language. It was about the definition of built environment and your definition of placemaking. I think those are two separate podcasts.
Sorry.
in themselves, but just to say that you are not the first person to come on this podcast to say that and to bring it up. So I think there is a general, I mean, certainly among certain practitioners, about moving away from the term placemaking, and I know colleagues have adopted place shaping as an evolution of maybe placemaking.
I've also heard place crafting. The last big conversation I had about this, I'll say, was we sort of went around in circles around it. But the real question that we were asking is, what is the right thing to do? Do we come up with another term, or do we try to reclaim what good placemaking is about?
Yeah.
What makes more sense? And I don't have an answer to that. Because there's a history that the roots of placemaking are powerful and to be proud of, but it's about helping people understand, communicating the story of placemaking better, raising up those good practice that, I don't know. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the right answer is there, but it is.
And I'm with you. And I mean, I'm also on the fence with the term built environment. I mean, to me, you mentioned natural environment, and to me, if you think about two environments that we inhabit as humans, and obviously as their fellow living species, it's either the natural environment or the built environment, the human intervention. Obviously, our fellow species build their own homes with nature, so that's still part of the natural environment. And I don't know, I struggle with it too, because sometimes I sway in a different direction. But like you said, maybe it's not about getting distracted about what the definition is, but let's focus on creating better places and creating better built environments.
Well, although I think that that's what you should do. I think that the vast majority of people should not get caught up in it and just focus on building better environments. I think what I want to do is try to define it. And again, not what a good place is, but I do think so as an educator, when I started, I was great. I understood the sort of vague place literacy and what I wanted to do with it and how I sort of intended it. And it's definitely very much sort of embedded in ideas around environmental literacy and visual literacy. And there are other models to follow. And it all felt quite clear. And then I thought, okay, excellent. So if I want to go and test this out with a group of 10-year-olds, and I'm going to do a lesson. Fabulous. So what I need them to understand is that place is this complex, multifaceted thing, that system. So what is the takeaway? What are the basic learning objectives? It's like, what is place? And I'm like, there is no definition of place, right? We have placemaking. We have the Office for Place. We have place-based approaches to things. We have place-based education. We talk about place all the time. And yes, in everyday conversation, we do have enough of an understanding of what that means for that to work. But if we really want to dig into something and treat it rigorously, we need that agreed definition. We need an agreed definition that we can also argue over. That's fine as well. But there needs to be something that what is part of it and what isn't, if anything isn't. So I actually think that having those definitions and being able to agree on common terms and common language has its place. I'll just say that. It has its place as well. I also really genuinely don't think that if we all start sort of wasting our time having that argument, it is wasting our time having that argument. So as important as I personally think it is, I don't think we all need to necessarily be engaging in it, which is maybe just shooting myself in the foot. But this is why we need a beautiful little simple model that we can just put out into the world and everybody can then be like, okay, cool. And then get on with doing it. And just making sure that they are looking at all of those perspectives and that they're at least aware that they have not taken into sufficient consideration, the environmental aspects because they've been thinking so much about the human aspects, and that's fine. But at least you're aware now. I don't know.
And maybe that is that role that the Place Literacy Project and its collaborators, that's the role that you play in developing that agreed definition, in developing those agreed terminology that we can share within the built environment, with the people that we're serving as practitioners and custodians of the built environment. All right, we're coming now towards the end of our conversation. I mean, we could go on for hours, but Deborah, let's wrap this all up. Let's do some future gazing. All right, if you had the theoretical magic wand, if you could make one fundamental change to how we approach the built environment globally, and I suspect I know what you're going to say based on what we've just talked about, what would it be? What would that one thing be? to improve our collective future?
We need to democratize agency in the built environment, democratize knowledge and agency.
Let's take a moment there. Okay, let's democratize agency. That's a call to action for our listeners right there. So, well, Deborah, what's next for you?
Oh, gosh, doing a lot of these workshops, actually. That's the next sort of this year, really, is really focused on sort of getting my hands dirty and doing as many of these workshops as I can. So, I mean, again, anyone who has a space that they would like to develop place awareness in, or a group that they would like to engage in this kind of a conversation, very up for it. And hopefully coming out of that will be a first version of the framework of place, or a short glossary, something that we can start testing and getting people to have those conversations together.
Amazing. That sounds really good. I think I'm excited for you.
Fab.
What you're going to come up with. And obviously, we're going to have a follow-up conversation. We'll dive into once you're ready, once your product is out there in the world, when this framework is out there in the world, we can have a follow-up conversation. And that concludes the more, let's say, serious element of the conversation, the learning element. Well, now we're going to go into the fun element, where we can learn from this fun element as well. So it's called Know Your Neighborhood. It's a little fun thing we like to do here on Talking Place, just to get to know places a little bit more. We do a little research and come up with 3 facts, and then we'll share it with you. And all you have to do is to state whether they're true or false. And we'll all learn a little bit more about the place in the process. How does that sound?
Terrifying.
Oh, come on. Come on. You'll be fine. You'll be fine. All right. You ready?
Ready.
Super. All right. So obviously we're talking about Florence. Most of our listeners will know where Florence is. It's based in Italy. So my first question is, Florence was once the capital of Italy, but only for a brief period during the 19th century.
True.
Oh, yeah. You're very confident off the back of that.
That I actually know stuff about, exactly.
Okay.
Anyone who has been to, there was actually, it was Florence, and then I think maybe Torino, and then Rome. And it was only for a couple of years, I think. But anyone who has been to Florence, who knows the sort of the boulevards that go all the way around, sort of ring the city, and then go up into the hills above Florence, and there's a copy of the sculpture of Michelangelo's David that looks out over the city. Piazza della Repubblica, which is right in the center. Those are all, remnants doesn't feel like the right word. They were part of the plan that Giuseppe Poggi made as part of the Florence Capital project. So it's really strongly marked on the city. And in fact, this is actually why I did a paper in my master's on the Synagogue of Florence, which is gorgeous. And anybody who visits Florence should absolutely check it out. It is much, much more impressive of a building than you would expect a city as small as Florence to have. But because the project for it came up when it was meant to be the synagogue of the capital of the country.
So I have here in my notes that Florence served as Italy's capital from 1865 to 1871. So a very, very short period of time. Very short period of time. Yeah, but yeah, that's a little fun fact I didn't know either. Anyway, moving on. Question number 2. Florence Historic Center is one of the few places in the world where traffic is restricted to protect ancient monuments, and the city has no modern skyscrapers.
I'll go for true.
Okay.
I might have some arguments with it, but I'll go for true.
No, it is in fact true. Okay. Florence has strict regulations to prevent modern urbanization. And in 2018, Florence implemented a low emission zone, and the initiative was part of a broader effort to make the city more sustainable by limiting the access of older, more polluting vehicles to certain areas. You talk about arguing, and this point about the city has no modern skyscrapers, that's again, I think, a subject of a whole other podcast about, places like in Italy, which are frozen in time almost, and they can't evolve because, but are we going to move into the 21st century, or are we going to stay, be in the 10th or 12th or 15th century, whenever those fantastic buildings were built?
There's a lot of, when I sort of said before, I think there's a lot of really interesting things to pick up on. Another shout out to a friend, an architect who lives here in Florence, Karen Templin, who many of your listeners may know. She recently published a book on the Mansion House. Does amazing work. And that's actually why Marcia came out here. Was Karen and I were running something which she's still very much on top of, the Salon of Urban Architecture here in Florence. And I've had amazing conversations with her about the ways in which Florence and Italy in general show sort of the capacity for reuse of buildings and sort of redefining. She would say it much better, but there's some very interesting way. Do we have to build up, move into the 21st century necessarily? Do we have to rebuild? We have to have new build.
Moving on to our third and final question. In 2023, the app Unexpected Italy was launched to boost tourism in cities like Florence.
No idea.
I take a guess. It's 50-50.
Exactly. We've had two true, so I'm going to go for a false.
Oh my God. The probability. That's smart. That's very smart. All right, my friend. That is actually correct, even though you took a punt of it. But the clue is in the name. It is a trick question, but the clue is in the name. So Unexpected Italy is actually designed to guide tourists to off-beaten path locations, promoting more sustainable travel and help ease the pressure on crowded tourist hotspots like Florence or Venice. So we hear about Venice in the headlines every other day about introducing a tourist tax, a tourist fee to get in because it's constantly overcrowded. It's a victim of its own success. So I think that's very clever. There are other places in Italy as well, not just Rome, not just Florence, not just Venice.
I can say, as someone who has lived in New York and spends a lot of time in London and lives here, I think it's difficult to understand from one of those big cities like London or New York, which obviously are masses of tourism, but that they stay in certain neighborhoods essentially. And Florence is just not that big, and we are very close to the Venice situation here. Increasingly, it's a real issue.
Yeah.
So well done, app organizers.
Yeah. Well, 3 for 3. Well done. And you were so. Devorah, our time together has come to an end. I'm sure we're going to see more of you in various shapes or forms. It has been so inspiring to talk to you. You threw up several provocations. All those listening, I'm sure your minds are buzzing as are mine. And there are lots of things that I'm going to definitely, as soon as I get off this, go and probably Google. All that's left for me to do is to thank you for joining me to talk about place.
This was such a pleasure. I had so much fun. The questions got me thinking a lot as well. So likewise, I'm about to go do some deep dives, I think.
Well, that's what we're here about. Getting people thinking and people talking about place. That's all. That's in the name.
Love it.
Thank you so much, Devorah, and we'll see you soon. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Feel free to join the conversation on social media with the hashtag #TalkingPlace. I would also love for you to leave our podcast a review and subscribe to all our podcasts and YouTube channels so you don't miss an episode. There's so much more to explore when it comes to creating good places, and I'm excited to do a deep dive into other topics with you in our next episode. I'm Tanisha Raffiuddin, and it's been my pleasure to be your podcast host. Thank you for listening. See you again next time, where we'll continue talking place. Talk soon.